Good afternoon to everybody. I must say that I am pleased that we have arrived, that we've been on this day that we've been working on for some time. I wanted to recognize everybody who's here, but I think the program director has done so, so I don't need to do so. But I must recognize Umamu Pindile Baleni. If I don't do that, she won't make me an honorary DG at the presidency. So I must recognize her. And I would also want to recognize the Auditor General, Umamu Tsakani Maluleke. We are pleased you are here. And of course, the commission, the chair of the commission, who advocates Sizani, and the rest of the distinguished guests who we have here with us. Welcome. As I said, I'm pleased to be part of this launch, which has been coming for some time. From now on, we will not be acting as individual former directors general, but will be acting as a collective, and it will make it easier for us to relate to government in the manner in which we should. I'm not going to repeat the genesis of this association and the statement that was made in April of 2016 after the expose of the state capture nightmare that we have gone through. And that was followed by a media statement in May. You can see how disciplined the team was. Send a memo to Treasury, Public Service Administration ministers, copied them to the president and the deputy president at the time, and took almost more than a month before we went public, because we really wanted to make sure that they've got the letters. And the caption of that communication was a voice of reason. Save, in quotes, save the soul of the public service from state capture. It occurred to me when I went through those documents again, and there's been a request for copies, I'm sure they can be made available, that if the government had taken heed of our call and expression of concerns and appeals, we would not have been at the level at which we are. The reality is that there's been a terrible damage that has been caused to the country, and we're going to pay a huge price for it, as we have already started paying the price. What is worse is that the evidence from various commissions and criminal cases being conducted now bring to reality the saying that a fish rots from the head down. The rot spread like a virulent cancer and weakened not only the capacity of the state, but it critically linked up the rot amongst politicians and the rest of the public service with the criminal syndicates and underground corrupt world. And I think people have undermined this, that we've had a convergence between corrupt political leaders and civil servants with the underground criminal world, and working together. The assassination of leaders, councillors, candidates for election, just for a local government election, which is happening in KwaZulu-Natal and moving into Gauteng, are disturbing. But indeed, once you link up with the criminal world, that's where you end up. Once this happens, it leads to empowering and legitimizing the criminal world. Because if the political players and public servants work with them, the police also join them, and then all of us become vulnerable. The July failed insurrection in quotes showed how close we had come, where criminal elements would take charge and the state took long to respond. It is no wonder that billions of rands have been siphoned from South Africa to foreign lands through known criminal syndicates without any consequences. You just have to look at the deep study that has been made about the way in which the Gupta monies were moved from the banks and other places via KwaZulu-Natal through known criminal syndicates out of the country. We have seen trains, train stations, and rail infrastructure being stolen, making travel to work for poor workers many times more expensive. I mean, the people in Soweto have to rely on a taxi instead of an economic trained mode of transport. And in the townships where my family is and everybody in Soweto, Izinyoka criminal gangs have taken over the supply of electricity in many townships, leading to a collapse of the electricity distribution system. And it has left the township. I'm actually amazed. When I grew up, we used Imbaula and Primus stoves, and some parts of Soweto have reverted back to that because there's been no electricity for many months. And that tells you how backward we have gone. We are now beginning to have red security zones in the country where the police cannot guarantee one security. And I just dealt with one of those last week. All this raises the question of the capacity of the state to govern or to assert its sovereign authority. I am sure that you will agree with me that all this must be reversed. If we don't, we're going to end up being a failed state. And we must reverse it at a speed of light. And my comrade, Rob Adam, will know the formula to calculate that speed of light. We have to do it now. We must crowd out the criminals from the top to the bottom and create safer and pleasant working spaces for honest public servants with determination to serve the people. That is why we are here, to support this revolutionary turnaround strategy of government to make South Africa what we expected it to be. And when we engaged in the liberation struggle, many of us, and many lost their lives in trying to secure our freedom. Most of those of us who became part of the first generation of directors general, if you remember, of the new democratic South Africa, we actually went in first as special advisors because there were directors general in place there. And we advised the political principals. And we had one single objective, and I want to state this because it's still clear in my mind: to transform the racist apartheid state and its public service, which were designed to regulate and control movements of the Black majority. That's what preoccupied the most, to a democratic developmental state. That's what we're set up to do. and to gear that state to offer services to all the people of South Africa, not a selected group of people, especially the disadvantaged. By 1998, we formed the Forum of South African Directors General. I can see some of the Directors General who were there when we did that, to manage the state and government in a coordinated and integrated manner to produce the best outcomes. I remember Unjobe doing those drawings about how we integrate government and producing structures, etc., at that time. And we did not only do that for South Africa, but we went beyond. So you will remember we embarked on the African Renaissance Project. We ended up with NEPAD and, the peer review mechanism. And I remember each one of the directors general were assigned to deal with their relevant areas within the African continent. So we're not just doing it for ourselves, but it was a broader responsibility. I thought one must refer to the 10-year review report. Comrade Joel, DG Joel, who prepared that for us from the policy unit, as you would remember. It told the story about the first 10 years. So if you want to go into it, that's where you should. One cannot say, though, that there was no corruption during our time. And I want to emphasize that once declassified, my letter to President Mandela at that time, copied to Deputy President Mbeki, will show that we were confronted by some levels of corruption even then. The challenge then was that the old order was corrupting the new, compromise them so that you can never deal with their corruption. If you want to be protected as a corrupt person, you simply corrupt people around you and compromise them. The difference, though, is that during the first two administrations, when most of us were directors general, corrupt officials feared honest officials who served with integrity. Now, the corrupt politicians and corrupt public servants have taken the upper hand, and those who are clean are on the run. Whistleblowers, for instance, are being killed, like Babita Diokaran, a senior official, as you know, of the Department of Health in Gauteng. I think what also struck me when I talked to some of the local government officials who have been caught up in the VBS story is that they were told the law is going to be changed. And so they acted as if the law has been changed already about the bank and acted in a completely lawless manner. Instead of saying to the leaders, change the law first before we move the money, they move the money believing the law is going to be changed. And that's the level of lawlessness that has gripped this country. That really is frightening. And most of these officials, of course, are victims. When you go to these commissions in court, the political principal who instructed you to do it has not put it in writing as the PFMA requires you to do. If they ask you to do something irregular or you're not happy about it, you ask them to put it in writing. But of course, some of the directors general during our days, directors general during our days, who did that lost the job immediately once you asked the minister to put it in writing. Our stated objective in our constitution, as Yako has said, is to contribute to the professionalization of the public service and assist in building the capacity of the South African state. We make this offer with humility, and those who are in government, we do it with humility to learn from each other. There are new things I don't know that those who are in the office know better now. And we're hoping that we can work together to be able to help each other. We have briefed the President and the Minister of Public Service and Administration about our efforts, and they are aware of what we are doing. So we're not doing it outside authority, but we are an independent association. That's how we constructed it, so that we keep our independence. We've got a code of ethics to make sure that no one without integrity becomes part of us, because we don't want to transfer the leprosy of corruption, etc., into the public service. I would like to conclude by saying I'm pleased that we've reached this stage. We can interact with government in a much more formal way rather than an informal way. And we hope that the directors general who are in office now will be able to work with us in this regard, including the regulatory bodies and Auditor General's office. We are here to help. I would like to conclude without having indicated to my colleagues that I would like to dedicate this launch to the late Professor Stan Sangweni, because for me, he acted during that time as a light to us as we develop the public service regime and codes of ethics and conduct. I always say the privilege of that first and second generation of DGs was to create new things, to create new codes of arms, to create new national orders, to create provinces and systems and local governments. It has been an extraordinary exercise, but that turned around as the bomb was dropped on it, and we have to make sure that we recover that. I thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Reverend. I'm not going to summarize what you've said. I think everyone was listening, and to a certain extent, you covered why we're established and what we seek to do, and also covered a little bit what Bongi would have covered, but I think Bongi can give us a little bit more detail in terms of how we were established and how we got to this point. Just before we do that, it's nice to take a group picture. And to do that, we'll need to just put our cameras on. And please leave it on until we say, because we're on different screens. So, it won't be all in one picture. And Vasanthi is going to be taking a picture of, and she will tell us when she's done. And you would want to just make sure that you appear in a way that you want anyone else who sees your picture in future to not for your grandchildren not to feel ashamed of seeing in the picture. You know, the challenge is that I might get into trouble if I start calling people by names, but just to remember to be seated and not moving around whilst we're taking a picture. Vasanthi will tell us when you're done.
Okay, all done.
All done. Thank you very much. All right, so we're going to move to the next item on the agenda, which is an input by Bongi Wenjobe, who's going to tell us the background to the establishment of the association. Over to you, Bongi.
Thank you, Pam, and good afternoon to everybody, all of the colleagues. Some faces I haven't seen in quite a while, and some names I don't quite know, but it's really great to be at this point in time. And I think Pam is correct. You know, I thought I wasn't just going to do a kind of mechanistic or transactional approach to the storyline. I was going to divide my input into 3 phases, because I think there's really 3 phases we've had on this journey of trying to get to today. And I guess there's a couple more phases we need to go through going forward. The first phase is very much what Frank was talking about, which is really when many of us joined government, we were, some of us very activist, some of us didn't even understand what government was really all about. And we were, I don't want to say thrown in, but effectively we're thrown into roles of great seriousness, the Directors General, without having gone to school for that. So we landed in the roles as Directors General. And I think in the first probably couple of years, many of us probably focused very much on what we had to do within our areas of competence and areas of expertise. But where I think the startings, you know, the beginnings of a real, of what I think underpins the value and the orientation of this foundation is when there were various discussions within government around the developmental state. And I don't think those have been concluded. And alongside those discussions, we were then organized as Directors General into FOSAD, the Forum of South African Directors General. And maybe we're also missing that. But I think that that organization linked to the organization of the clusters allowed us to actually deliver as a collective. There were so many, I think there were 2 dimensions to that era. One was there was deep learning around the public service. There was a deep commitment to some of the principles that were embodied in the new Public Service Act, in the new Constitution, and just generally the sentiment around how do we transform the public service in order that it delivers for our people. A lot of us, I think the national level Directors General probably had much tighter engagement, purely because they were closer together as well. So the other part of it was how we then developed tools to empower us to do our job better. I recall the development of the Public Service Leadership Development Program. We've got the people who drove that sitting in this room, in this Zoom call. We also had the commitment statement that we signed as Directors General, which I think bound us to the principles that were also, that we believe should sit within the public service of South Africa. I say which was exciting because we also had things that we achieved as a collective. I'm not sure how many of you remember, Alistair, how we used to chair the economic cluster, and we ended up with a more integrated and long-term approach to integrated planning for infrastructure. We found ourselves as part of the champions of establishing and embedding the Batupile principles. If you recall the discussion we had around the specific role of Directors General in relation to that of ministers and deputy ministers, and the many cabinet meetings where we would sit on the periphery of the cabinet meeting, but at awkward moments, sometimes we called right into the meeting to participate. So in a way, that was probably a school that many of us went through, those of us who were in the first administration, first and second administrations. And maybe that's exactly why it's so important that we kind of reconvened when we saw that things were going wrong. So phase 2 for me was the era that Frank spoke about, where we could see that things were going wrong, but we understood that the basic, what do they call it, scaffolding of a competent public service was actually in place. And it just needed to be given recognition, it needed to be embedded, it needed to be implemented. So phase 2 of this Public Service Association, this Association of Former Directors General, was really, I think initially a lot of lamenting what had worked, and we're not saying everything was perfect. It was rethinking what could we be doing, and we started testing the concept of an association of former Directors General. And it was a journey. It was difficult. Besides the contributions we made in the letter that we wrote to the president, I think the parallel discussions were around what needs to go into an association of former directors general. And we faced many dilemmas. Where we landed is what Ayanda is going to speak to, so I won't touch that. What was really interesting was that in the discussion around the dilemmas, maybe that's the time when we then set up the WhatsApp group. But in the discussion around the dilemmas, I think there was a lot of, there was a desire to build something that is going to have credibility, integrity, and be effective, and some longevity. But on the other hand, our dilemma was that we didn't know how then to bring people on board. And I think with the energies that were being spent, I think primarily focused on trying to address matters that were being brought before the Zondo Commission, we sort of, I wouldn't say fizzled out, but we slowed down in our engagements around this form of, this association of public servants. Then phase 3, I think, is where we now got reinvigorated. And I suppose, you know, the wisdom of you know, you try once, you have a mistake, you try again, and usually third time lucky, which I think is where we landed, is we were able now to think beyond ourselves. Initially, we had kind of studied what other countries had done and seen how it is quite normal to have some way in which former public officials can continue to contribute to through civic duty or to the enhancement of public service delivery. So in phase 3, rather than just doing desktop research, we started then the engagements with PARI and other entities who had, and the Public Service Commission and government, as Frank has mentioned, to understand and to share our thinking and to engage and to bring some structure and clarity and almost have an outside-in view on what is possible and how we should go about setting it up. So I think the contribution that PARI has made to bringing us to this stage cannot be underestimated. It has been extremely valuable. I'll keep my input brief because I think, like I said, Frank has spoken to many of the issues, but I think I just want to end on perhaps the challenges going forward and the things we need to think about. So we kind of at the end of phase 3, and we need to, from today, think about what phase 4 should look like. Some of the issues are, we need to make sure that we desensitize the sense that this is a small group of people and rather expand and find mechanisms to make it intentionally inclusive and properly inclusive. Not just inclusive in terms of directors general, but we need to be thinking, and I know there are a couple of non-directors general here, but retired public servants. We need to think about, ultimately, we need to be thinking about the senior management service and the public service. If we're really serious and we go back to what the dream was around the PSLDP, it was that the PSLDP would be a requirement for becoming a member of the senior management service of the public service. And that would have been a tall ask for any individual. But at the same time, what we would have done, it would have made sure that when people sit in decision-making processes in government, they understand the full spectrum of what is expected of them, both as public servants, but more importantly, as senior managers in the public service, and then specifically the accounting officers, the directors general. So as we move forward, I just want to affirm the fact that, yes, it might have been a small, I think as Margaret Mead puts it, a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens, those of us who burnt the midnight oil and kept the WhatsApp group alive. But it's actually going to be successful. This initiative will only be successful if we're able to be more inclusive and retain and build an identity that has integrity, that we can demonstrate integrity of the public service, that has independence of thought, so it can always feel free to comment on a professional and principled manner around what should be in place for a South African public service. And of course, that has longevity. It should not fizzle out just because certain champions who are great activists in this process are no longer active participants. So the intragenerational dimension of how we are structured and how we work is important. So with those few words, I hope I've been able to put a slightly different angle on the story that Rev Chikane who has always remained our DG, our DG, the DG of DGs in the collective of the, particularly the first Public Service Administration cohort. Thank you, Pam.
Thank you very much, Bongi. I just want to make sure that I've removed spotlight on you. All right, so we move on the program. We will be taking discussion later on the program. So there are just a few other speakers. The next speaker is Dr. Ayandan Saluba, who's going to say a few words on what is this association really about?
Thanks, Pam. Thanks, colleagues, and just to recognize again the DG in the presidency, our AG, and the chair of the Public Service Commission. Pam, if you see me at some point taking off the video, don't think I'm running away. It's only that I see something signaling here that my connection is unstable. I hope it does not disappoint me.
Okay. Thank you.
I mean, a few points have already been raised by both by yourself, Pam, by Reverend Chikane, and by Bongi. And a lot of what really we envisage is captured in our code of ethics, in our constitution, and also in some of the documents that we've tried to put together as we were on this journey of trying to figure out how we should come together so that we can make a far much more coordinated contribution to the building of state capacity, the building of state capacity so essential for us to build a developmental state. So essentially that is where the journey began. And we also started from the point that we were fortunate to be afforded the opportunity to lead during our tenures as Directors General, and we regarded this as a great honor. We were younger, all of us then, and I must say we were a bit idealistic. As Bongi has said, we did not have all the experience, but what fired our bellies essentially was the desire to contribute to the democratic transition through building state capacity. In the process, I think we learned a lot, acquired skills, which we used during our tenure as DGs. And as Reverend said, at times we faltered, but I would like to believe that most of us faltered in the course of honest commitment to service. Our humble wish, therefore, now, which is really why we've come together, is to build a foundation of an institutionalized process of coordinating our effort so that we can exchange ideas, share our collective learnings, so that we can, as a collective, continue the task of contributing to the building of a capable state. As colleagues have already said, and I think this is something that we really want to stress, this is not a claim to monopoly of knowledge, but a considered effort to make a contribution to the cause of charting a developmental path anchored on a capable state that serves the interests of our country. And so one of the appeals that would make is that focus should be less on those who meet today, but rather on the significance of the foundation that we're trying to lay for future generations of former Directors Generals, as well as whatever thinking will evolve around the engagement of other senior public servants, so that we can keep on building an institution which will be a platform for exchange of ideas, coordinated contributions towards this effort of building a capable state, and also be a repository of institutional knowledge. So through this process, just to say that the intention is to avail ourselves to our government and other institutions that are engaged in this task. One of the things I think we would like to stress is that availing ourselves is not about what we think we did or what needs to be done. It's also to avail ourselves to share our failures and mistakes and to enable current leaders of the public service to make their own but new mistakes and not to repeat the ones we've already made, because that is the only way we can continue to progress. Having been in the public service, I would like to stress also, one of the things that we are very anxious to make sure that we convey very clearly is that we have a sense of the enormity of the task. And as Reverend said, we have the humility to understand also that wrong judgment and faulty execution can be well-intentioned and inevitable when you are giving your all in the blast furnace of practical work. So the only way to make progress is not about not faltering, but by limiting the prospects of repeating the same mistakes. So this platform for us, we hope, will be seized by our government. We will want to cooperate as best we can. There are also other institutions, of course, the Public Service Commission, the National School of Government, which I believe are very important. One of the things that, Bongi, as you were making your contribution, you in a sense, you reminded me of. And I stood and went to the wall of my home study here, where I'm hanging that famous document that we signed. In fact, it was on the 24th of August, 1999, establishment of the Forum of Directors General, and what we called our statement of commitment. And I'll go back to that because some of the things that are there essentially capture best what we would like to continue to contribute towards. But the point I wanted to also just raise is that we should remember what President Mbeki said to us in one of the engagement with FOSAD. And this is something that has really stuck in my mind and stuck in my mind throughout my term as a Director General. And he said that clean audits and running an effective department is the very basic, the most basic of the tasks that were expected of us. What he was appealing to us to do is for us to fundamentally see ourselves essentially as agents of change. And this idea about, which Bongi referred to, about coming together as a collective and see how we can, in a sense, contribute toward essentially what is not just the running of individual departments, but the bigger tasks of building state capacity. And what we'd like to do is to share those experiences, see what lessons we learned, and see to what extent those can be passed through to current members of the public service. And as Reverend says, this is not a unidirectional engagement. We completely understand, and in fact, we are fully aware that today's challenges have elements that are new, that are different. And so I think it would also enlighten us to get and share and learn from our colleagues so that the process of our joint collaboration towards this fundamental task that we believe is beginning is important, is a mutually beneficial. Now, the beginning that has been outlined by my colleagues has its own imperfections, but we believe a beginning was necessary. We have to enrich this process by finding a functional mechanism of engaging all spheres of government, because at the end of the day, the issue of the capacity of the state is an issue that's applicable to all spheres of government. And I think we would want to acknowledge that our reflection on engaging is true. And just to emphasize again, we see ourselves being available for collaboration together with the Public Service Commission and the National School of Government. We believe that the challenges ahead are getting tougher, but not insurmountable. And I think Reverend Chikane has outlined some of the challenges that we face. But we believe that we should keep our eyes firmly fixed on the need to build the capacity of the state as a fundamental prerequisite for realizing the dream in our compact as citizens, which is our constitution. We should not be detracted by any form of sectarianism, but focus on rising to this critical challenge of our time. So, in concluding, just to say that we see ourselves as coming together to support this task of building, of enhancing state capacity, play whatever role is appropriate. We understand fully well that it is never helpful for people. We've had our opportunity to serve, and therefore our engagement has to be in a very supportive role. And we're making ourselves available for that. Of making ourselves available for any mentorship roles, engagements, discussions with the other senior civil servants in the National School of Government. And finally, I think we would remain strong advocates for a civil service that truly advances the best interests of the citizens of our country, and a public service that really is focused on the task of enhancing the capacity of the state. So I think those are the comments I would like to make, Pam, now, and probably will come later to other points during the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we're gonna move a little bit to the second part of our agenda. The first part was about former directors general, giving a context to the meeting, how we got here and what we are about. So now we're changing gear a little bit and inviting Advocate Sizani from the Public Service Commission to give us the Public Service Commission's views on the launch. I just want to say, I thought, let me just read on the mandate of the PSC. And I'm sure you will. I can as someone who's working in the public in the PSC would probably do justice than what I could. But I think for us it's important and significant to get the support, or at least the attendance of the PSC, because we see that as outlined in the Constitution. The PSC has got an important role in terms of building the capacity of the state and also the public service in general. So it says here, the PSC derives its mandate from Section 195 and 196 of the Constitution. It's tasked and empowered to, amongst others, investigate, monitor, and evaluate the organization and administration of the public service. The mandate also entails the evaluation of achievements or lack thereof of government programs. The PSC also has an obligation to promote measures that will ensure effective and efficient performance within the public service and to promote values and principles of public administration as set out in the Constitution throughout the public service. So it's an important body. And we are deeply honored to have had the head of that institution joining us today to speak to us and share his wisdom and other commissioners' wisdom and the whole PSC's view on what we're about today. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Program Director, Ms. Pemiako, colleagues, former Directors General, and members of constitutional institutions that are here, the Auditor General. It is indeed an honor and a privilege to congratulate the former Director General to take this courageous decision to formally establish themselves into the Association of Former Directors General. I would also like to thank Reverend Chikana in dedicating the opening address to Professor Sangweni, who was our first Democratic chairperson. We're very proud of him. Thank you very much. The establishment of the association is not only opportune, but it is much needed for our country, in which decisive direction and influence are required to steer the public service and public administration to meet the obligations of the Constitution and the recommendations contained in the National Developmental Plan. In my brief input today, I want to be deliberately provocative and challenge the association about the role that it must play in shaping the discourse and narrative on building a capable, ethical, professional, accountable, and developmental public service. In November 2014, the Public Service Commission engaged with serving and former Directors General with a view to evaluate and assess the management of the career incidents of HODs. It was opined that although the concept of contractual appointments was brought into being to ensure innovation in the public service, it has created uncertainties for individuals occupying such positions. I remember DG Nelchitens, they used to say that in England, there are permanent secretaries and temporary ministers. In our country, there are permanent ministers and temporary DGs. A two-track system providing for flexibility through contract appointments where a skilled person is employed to turn around a department within a given time period was okay. But we also needed a cadre of DGs appointed on a more permanent basis, which was also our proposal. Our consultation and mediation of disputes between EAs and HODs also pointed to concerns that the political administrative interface in South Africa is dysfunctional. And this contributes to, among others, service delivery challenges, the high turnover rate of HODs, and the administrative, legal, and political mismanagement. They were also of the opinion, those former DGs we met, that the lodging of grievances by DGs against EAs has the unintended effect of aggravating matters or further harming the employment relationship. This was attributed to the maturity of the role players in this regard. The fallouts between DGs and EAs often led to disciplinary actions against DGs, the precautionary suspensions that we have seen. In fact, the management of the entire disciplinary process have in many cases proven to be unfair and not dealt with in a consistent manner. It has led to unnecessarily and costly action, court action, and impacted negatively on the reputation of the public service. In the paper by former Director General dated July 2020, entitled Building a Capable Developmental State, several primary capacity challenges were highlighted, some of which are inter alia. One, the ethical foundations of public service have been eroded, and the public sector has steadily lost its professional ethos and dedication to serving our people. The lines of accountability have been blurred to elevate political control rather than autonomous capacity of administration, leading to a subservient administration subject to undue political interference. Serious limitations of advanced skills with appointments made on political considerations rather than expertise, limited tenure at senior levels, poor succession planning and leadership development, and over-reliance on consultants, even in policy formulation. Inappropriate configuration of the center of government with no clear head of the public service. A state that is disconnected from the society within which it is located, with public participation processes that are compliance-driven rather than meaningful. At this point, I would like to highlight some key points that should be addressed to provide the required foundation for building a capable, developmental-oriented, and accountable public service for your consideration and decision-making in terms of the most effective way for it to be realized. I would like to raise the following points. The realization of the fundamental rights in Section 1 of the Constitution and the adherence to the constitutional values in Section 195 and principles must be supported as the foundation underpinning the governance system. And I think your Constitution says this quite clearly. Secondly, a meritocratic recruitment system is a precondition to an ethical, more accountable, and legitimate governance system. The creation of an independent institutional framework to oversee a meritocratic recruitment system, to embed the fundamental rights and values in the Constitution, and to hold the public administration accountable is fundamental to meeting the first 2 points. The PSC is central to the creation of an independent institutional framework, including the monitoring and evaluation of the implementation of this framework aligned with the constitutional principles. The implementation of Chapter 13 of the NDP and review of the powers and functions of the PSC can no longer be delayed and substituted duties given to departments without the required mandate. The next point that I would like to raise is that as former Director General, I see that in your documents, you have raised some of the things that I would like to comment on. The next point that I want to raise is that as former Director General, you have been very candid about the role of the Public Service Commission. Many scholars and analysts have submitted that Section 196(4) should be invoked to provide the PSC with additional powers in its overall oversight mandate, as well as for the implementation of the recommendations contained in Chapter 13 of the NDP regarding the hybrid model, where the Public Service Commissioners, together with the head of the public service, will draw up a short list for the appointment of DGs and DDGs and give that short list to the ministers to choose the preferable candidate. I'm of the view that the Public Service Commission mandate may be sufficiently broad for it to have a direct involvement in the recruitment of senior posts in the public service, as the NDP suggests. I must report that the executive has decided to appoint a DG in the presidency to be the head of the public service and manage the career incidents of DGs. This we actually support as progress. The president, as of now, since the court case of the DG of Home Affairs, I think it's Baleni, I've just forgotten his name. The president is the EA, the executive authorities of all DGs, not ministers. It is still early days to say how this will work, and no powers has yet been delegated to executive authorities by the president. The Public Service Commission has been excluded contrary to the recommendation of Chapter 13 of the NDP in that appointment process of career incidents of HODs. I do want to raise a few things as I'm going towards concluding that I would like the DGs to consider. I see that the DGs have given themselves a role of saying that largely their objectives will be to look at mentoring, advice, and advocacy. I want to ask a few questions as to, for instance, looking inwardly, for instance, first at the composition of the Public Service Commission. The Public Service Commissioners need to be consciously and deliberately chosen, I argue, to include a proportion of the retiring Directors General. In many jurisdictions, like Malaysia, for instance, you would find that Public Service Commissioners are former ambassadors, are former senior academics, are former Directors General, and retired parliamentarians. However, in South Africa, former Directors Generals don't want to dirty their hands largely, do not appear interested in applying to be commissioners of the Public Service Commission, where they can guide the system and do this advice and this mentoring, even to junior DGs and other DGs. They don't apply for these positions. In helping the capacity of the public service, former Director Generals have the opportunity to do well as commissioners, and with their experience, they will be in a position to advise both Directors Generals and ministers. In your view, why is this a trend in South Africa, and what do you think should be done to reverse this trend? Let me just give you one example. By November 2021, the National Assembly and the Gauteng Provincial Legislature will be advertising 4 positions of commissioners who are retiring. And I challenge you to apply for these positions. Fortunately, those positions include my position and also Commissioner Nzimande's positions. So we are retiring in January. So 4 positions will be advertised in November with other commissioners. And we are asking, why can't DGs also apply for these positions? 3 of these positions will be at national level and 1 will be at Gauteng. So I'm challenging DGs to consider this. Equally, I'm tempted to ask if former Directors General, especially those who worked with departments that have oversight over state-owned entities, regulatory bodies, and direct interaction with all 3 spheres of government, have diversified their skill set in order to play a critical role in SOEs, local government, and other multilateral structures. My honest view is that if former Director Generals have the necessary capabilities and are committed to serving the country in various capacities with commitment, this avenue should also be considered and explored. This proposal is informed by the findings and recommendations of the PSC study on the recruitment, retention, career pathing, and utilization of senior management services members' expertise and skills in the public service, a report we produced in 2017 and accessible from our website. For instance, I would like to mention just a few challenges, DGs. As you know, local government all over the country, especially in provinces like Northwest, is in a state of collapse. And we are looking for serious administrators. Why are DGs not former DGs not available to be former administrators? Some provinces have been under Section 100, like even Northwest and even Limpopo. But why DGs not available to be available to assist with their skills in these things by being administrators and turn around those provinces and turn around those municipalities? And I can tell you one of the problems, of course, is that Section 100 for the provincial intervention and Section 139 for provinces to intervene in local government don't have legislations that actually direct what are the roles and how they should be actually regulated and implemented. And as a result, you'd find that premiers are very frustrated because they don't know what the administrator is going to do and what the premier should do. You should have seen how frustrated Professor Job Mukoro was in Northwest because he would find that he would take a decision. The administrator will report to the Minister of Culture or the Minister of Public Service and Administration, and they would overrule him. And there's no law, no regulations dealing with this. These are some of the things that we need to deal with. And these are some of the things that in building the capacity of the state and actually creating sustainable and inclusive institutions that we need our former DGs to help us. as a final point, I wish to point out that the Public Service Commission has had previous engagement with serving and former Directors General at various stages and would like to escalate these engagements now that an association of former Directors General has been formalized. One of the most important priorities for such engagement should be the building of the capacity and capability to underpin a developmental state. Key to this capacity and capability is diagnostic, planning, and implementation capabilities. The Public Service Commission has entered into an agreement with the United Nations Development Programme, UNDP, National Planning Commission, NPC, and the National School of Government, NSG, on a program on building state capability. Two key projects in this program are the professionalization of the planning and policy analyst profession. The last time we had a working policy analyst thing was during Joel, but clearly we have a problem now with our public servants being able to turn policy into programs that are implementable. That's why we are told that we have good policies, but we fail in implementation. And our education system, Madam Chairperson, also does not create our public servants to be ready to serve government, for a career in government. It does not necessarily mean that a student with an LLB, when he joins government, will be able to draft legislation. It does not mean a person with economics can draw an economic plan for government and so on. So we need this capacity of DGs plus the School of Government to actually do this induction and also this mentoring and so on to assist people to turn policy intentions into implementable and effective programs. So we need the former Director General to meet us with the UNDP and the NSG to discuss this question of this capacity building. Further, one of the key points that we have all agreed about is the need to professionalize the public service, which means that we must build a fit-for-purpose public service that is qualified, ethical, value-based, meritocratic, responsive, innovative, and developmental. It is important that all posts in the public service are properly categorized in terms or classified in terms of inherent qualifications. For an example, you cannot have a DG who majored in biblical studies. Sorry, Reverend Chikan, I have nothing against biblical studies, running the Department of Transport. In China, you would have that person being a civil engineer. The PSC has also strongly recommended that as part of professionalizing the public service, we must introduce both entry and promotional exams for candidates, like in all other developmental states, although we are still aspiring to be one. I want to say the fight against corruption is hollowing our state, undermining our institutions, and more importantly, disadvantaging the poor. We call on the former DGs to join us in the fight to build integrity in the public service, return to those values we fought for, create strong, capable, and inclusive institutions. I'm certainly making this clarion call to you, former DGs, that your country needs you before it is too late and it is regarded as a failed state. As a failed state, I thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm sure the DGs or former DGs are listening. There are quite a few practical ways that we can contribute, and and I'm sure we will take those forward as the association. There is the chat box is quite active. So if people could just take the time to go through that. I'm not going to read that in the interest of time. We are 5 minutes behind schedule. And so I'm going to move us on to the next speaker, who is the current DG in the presidency, Ms. Phindile Baleni. And I'm not saying this because it's her. I did say it in the beginning. I note that not all my speakers were in attendance at the time. So when I switch my camera on, it means you left with 1 minute. And so let's just stick to that so that we have time for questions and engagements later on. Without further ado, over to you, DG.
Thank you very much, Program Director, former DG, Yako, to the Auditor General of South Africa, the Chair of the PSC, the Honorary DG in the Presidency, now that he said it, and the distinguished colleagues. It is indeed for me a great honor to be in the company of all the people who are in this call today, all the former DGs. I've looked up to you. You've inspired me in a lot of ways, and you've assisted me both in developing my career, but also in the work that I've had to do at various stages of my life. So I'd like really to take an opportunity to thank you for the invitation to make an input on this great occasion, the occasion of the launch of the Association of Former Directors General of the Republic of South Africa. We all know on this call that the dawn of democracy in South Africa in 1994 gave birth to a complete and a complex set of tasks, responsibilities, hopes, aspirations, values, and expectations, ably captured in the founding provisions of the Constitution, and in the interest of time, I will not quote that. In the context of a complex society that this Constitution was supposed to operate on, that consisted of varied internalized mindsets, shared assumptions, attitudes, convictions, interests, systems of meaning, motivations, beliefs, values, norms, conventions, statuses, roles, procedures, goals, and so forth, otherwise also known as a collective conscience. In that context, the leadership across the broad spectrum of society should be mobilized to help build a society that the Constitution envisions. It is a leadership both at an individual and collective level that thinks ahead, that leads in finding solutions and effectively deliver on the national development priorities. In his inaugural annual lecture at the Mapungubwe Institute of Strategic Reflection, MISTRA, in 2012, the late Professor Thandika Mkandawiri argued that the real issue then is not so much of building the African state, but making it more accountable and a more efficient instrument for addressing the issues that Africans have risen to consider fundamental. He asserts a growing understanding that what is being referred to here is a democratic and developmental state, a state that is developmental in the sense that South Africa needs to be seen as a facilitator and promoter of economic growth, structural transformation, and addresses the causes of inequality. Democratic in the sense that government derives its legitimacy through popular participation in electoral processes, and socially inclusive in the sense that government pursues social policies that ensure equitable entitlement of all its citizens to ensure that their capacities and functioning are adequate for a decent inclusion in societal affairs. So in my view, I see the formation of the Association of Former Directors General of the of the Republic of South Africa that is being launched today as a very important step in this process of mobilizing and providing collective leadership and solutions to the many complex problems that the country faces. I am certain that after your time in the public service, you have traversed the country, the continent, and the world, meanwhile collecting a wealth of experience, skills, and even qualifications that are invaluable in the effort for transformation, building, reconstruction, and recovery of the economy, as well as the society as a whole. Many of you probably have been asking the question, how is the situation since we left the public service? Well, in the context in which you discharged your responsibilities then has largely remained the same to this very day. The tasks at hand may not always be clearly defined, outcomes unbounded by time, and the environment has not always been stable. The costs have been unpredictable, and at any given time, objectives have often been multiple, ill-defined, and subject to negotiated change. We continue to have a multiplicity of stakeholders and interests. Sometimes prior knowledge is nearly non-existent. Risks may not be obvious and readily identified, and therefore not mitigated, minimized, and managed. We often have a multiplicity of mandates, existing procedures, institutional arrangements, governance structures, delivery systems, accountability, fiduciary responsibilities, etc. Colleagues, does this sound familiar? You probably, each one of you are saying, been there, done that, got the t-shirt. Thus, it is clear that there is a lot of work to do. Government and society needs you. In his engagement with the Forum of South African Directors General, FOSAD, on the 29th of June 2016, the then Deputy President, His Excellency Cyril Ramaphosa, said that Directors General are the engineers of the envisioned new South Africa and are a constant in the public service, and therefore are expected to play a crucial role in finding solutions that face society. You may no longer be in the public service now, in the sense you were in whilst working for government, but the fact remains you are still the brain trusts of this society. Though the situation might be dire now, with low economic growth, rising unemployment, inequality, poverty, unsatisfactory health and education outcomes, all of this well articulated in the 25-year review that showed our performance as a government, I can assure you that as the current core of public servants, we continue to persist in our efforts to realize the objectives of the Constitution. So with this launch today of the Association of Former Directors General, I think you seek to affirm that the task you found when you joined the public service did not end when you left. This launch is a clear demonstration of your deep sense of owning the responsibility to make a further contribution. In fact, many of you are, in all honesty, your contribution did not stop the day you left the public service. You have been hard at work all along. This initiative, therefore, just serves to gather the collective effort to ensure a higher impact. One of the defining features of the sixth administration is the collective responsibility across society. In our circumstances, we do need a commonly shared institution to address the main long-term problems that require coordinated collective action. All others have used the state for this purpose. I see no reason why South Africa should be the exception, especially if one accepts that South Africa must radically and rapidly transform its economy, not only to address the known ills of poverty, unemployment, and inequality, but also to deal with the new challenges of climate change, the ever-present pandemic and threats of corruption, gender-based violence and femicide, COVID-19, and all the other challenges that we face at the moment. With the formation of the Association of the Former Directors General, it is a response, almost as if it's a direct response to the sixth administration. Arising out of this initiative, there are many possibilities such as the social compacts, social partnership, social contracts, class compromise, social consensus, and social concentration. By social compacts, I refer to the institutionalization of consultation and cooperation, with the association playing a leading role to bring together the state, capital, labor, and other organizations in civil society. The country has called on all men and women from every walk of life to join hands in order to ensure that we have a developmental society. This is the message that runs through the launch of the association today. At the tail end of this message is an invitation for us to demonstrate our commitment to the Constitution that lays the basis for the construction of a democratic, non-racial, non-sexist, united, and prosperous society based on justice, equality, the rule of law, and the inalienable human rights of all. There are times, perhaps colleagues, when you may have volunteered to help, accepted, knocked at doors, and no one opened, shouted, and no one listened, requested meetings, and none granted. You probably have had the experience of frustration. You may have also been called names or even accused as people trying to rule from the grave. And I can hear you saying, all I wanted to do was to assist bring the nation back together. The current senior leadership in the public service alone cannot satisfy the endless requests of people, and therefore appeal to yourselves, all of you who have been here before. The fact that you are no longer part of the formal institutionalized existing structures should not restrict your potential. Participation in the development of the country is always a welcome initiative. Sometimes, as the current leaders, we have allowed the principle of legalism to condition our contribution. Yet common understanding, tolerance, and a shared belief will stand the association and the current institutions in good stead. Due to the position of power that we may hold, there may be a temptation to regard ourselves as the sole owners and the sole authorized distributors. However, there should be no suspicion, and the calls for an invitation to broaden our vision and to recognize the call for government to everyone to lend a hand in the development of our country. I have no doubt in my mind that the newly formed association will play a critical role in strengthening the public service. I would like to take a brief detour back in history. In 1992, 2 years before the first democratically elected government came into power, the Financial Mail predicted that control over the new South Africa would be determined in the public service and not necessarily at the political level. Moreover, unless the public service changed concurrently with the political and constitutional reform processes, it was believed that South Africa would run the risk of the new political dispensation in a public service structured and staffed according to outdated policies. It is true that the implementation of the government's transformation and development policies is dependent on the public service. And I heard the previous speakers talking about what you consider to be your mandate and your legacy. Reverend Chikane translated it very nicely, articulated it very nicely when he said that you saw your mandate as being to transform the racist apartheid state and its public service. So, and all the words that he utilized there. Fast forward, as South Africa enters the next phase of development, as we continue to ensure a progressive realization of socioeconomic rights enshrined in our constitution, the emphasis now lies in improving service delivery and the quality of life for all South Africans and the people who live in it. And this we have to do and confront the derailment of this mission through maladministration, malfeasance, and corruption, which characterizes the public service at the moment. It comes therefore as no surprise that a number of reforms have been introduced in the public service following reviews such as the Presidential Review Commission as early as 1996. The observation made in the OECD report entitled Government of the Future, dated 2000, underscores the point on why the association will be instrumental in joining up with the state to strengthen the public service. First, governments need to keep up with society in terms of being responsive, in terms of providing better, faster, and more services. Secondly, trust in government needs to be reestablished. Thirdly, the government's role is changing under new pressures, including the loss of government monopoly, greater competition, and the opening up of societies, as well as international structures. President Cyril Ramaphosa, His Excellency, in his State of the Nation address delivered on the 6th Democratic Parliament in June 2019, committed his administration to, amongst other things, building an ethical, capable, and developmental state in which there's no place for corruption, patronage, rent-seeking, and plundering of public money. And this is the state at which the public service is the flywheel. He indicated that an ethical state is dependent, among other things, on the corps of skilled professional public servants of the highest moral standards who are dedicated to serve the public service. And these are the areas that I will be focusing on during my tenure. The sixth administration puts as its first priority to build a capable ethical and developmental state. This MTSF priority primarily contributes to the implementation of the NDP Chapter 13, which asserts that key to reducing inequality and eliminating poverty, the state must play a transformative and developmental role. This will be done through focusing on strengthening of leadership, professionalization of the public service, skills development, accountability, coordination, intergovernmental relations, local government, and better governance of state-owned enterprises. Initiatives by transversal national departments such as the Presidency, the National Treasury, the Public Service and Administration, the Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs, DPME, as well as the Department of Women, Youth and People with Disabilities, are central to the state capacity and enabling the achievement of the country's developmental goals. And all these departments that I've listed are the departments that are at the center of government, with the presidency being at the core, but all of them forming the core of government. And we need to learn to make sure that these work very effectively as we traverse the work we do. And key to realizing the vision that the president has for the sixth administration are the basic values and principles governing the public administration. And these are found in section 195.1 of the Constitution. And in the interest of time, I will not be quoting them directly. In the mid-2000s, the Forum of South African Directors General, of which some of you DGs present here today were a part, authored a document called Capacity and Organization of the State, which sought to answer the question posed by the executive at the time, which was, what is the optimal structure and organization of the state to adequately respond to the challenges of the country? Let me be the first to admit that I do not know whether or not and how the question was answered or responded to. However, I know that we assist with the challenge of continuing to answer this question. Colleagues, pardon me for that bell, somebody will attend to it. Nevertheless, going through this document, I came across some very important observations that were made, and allow me to paraphrase some of the critical points the document raises. It pays attention to the aspect of forming the public service that embodies critical skills, a public service that has the ability to articulate a vision, ensure political mobilization behind it, and translate it into implementable chunks with clear allocation of responsibilities. And this was considered to be a critical element of state capacity. However, and now I'm quoting directly from the document, ladies and colleagues. However, if the urgent demand for purpose and focus had to be met, improvements would be required in two specific areas: the translation of broad ideals and strategies into clear programs and projects. Secondly, the public service as a whole, starting with the managers, should relate to each core program in their line function to the broader strategic priorities. And attached to these departmental programs then should there be indicators and broader social partnership. Thus, it is expected that the association, amongst its many tasks, will devote a significant amount of time to assist in this important task of the formation and the reformation of the public service. I see the work of the association playing a supportive role to the work of the state, as we, as the current cohort of directors general who are fashioning our legacy within the context of the immediate challenges where the state is seen to be failing and collapsing under the weight of lawlessness and corruption. A public service that's challenged to bring back integrity into the work of government. Now that you have been liberated from all the admin that goes with running departments, I am sure that you are breathing a sigh of relief, and we will look to you for some of the following aspects and assistance. So assistance at a technical level, which focuses on solving policy problems and applying specialized expertise in this regard. Some advocacy aspects which require the representational interests in the areas that you're involved in. Brokering aspects which focus on mediation and resolution of conflicts, and these are really policy conflicts and policy imperatives. And then the facilitator aspect, which focuses on protecting the interests of specific groups or constituencies. The partisan aspects, which require engagements with the political environment and in particular politics of the governing party, a party that has won elections and therefore needs to be engaged with. The policymaker aspects, where the senior public servants and politicians are involved in policy formulation. The legalistic aspects, which require a focus on the legal responsibilities and requirements. The ombuds aspects that require the undertaking of cases in order to protect the interests of the public in general and or individuals, and the trustee aspects which focus on the representation of interests in general. As I conclude, I'd like to put forward my expectations of the Association of the Former Directors General. I consider the association as the seat and the reservoir of thought leadership, a think tank, an intellectual authority on solutions for many of the ills that are bedeviling our society. I would expect the association to engage on questions that significantly engage the collective responsibility of government because they raise major issues of policy or because they are of critical public importance. Furthermore, the association should not shy away from engaging on questions which there is unresolved argument between departments or spheres of government. It will identify contending views and interests and suggest proposals to government on ways of resolving these. So one of the things I went to check out in my life was, if you have somebody who's called an apprentice, what do you call the person who supervises the apprentice? And a word I found is a word that's resonated with me, except for its gender bias, and I have changed it. So the person who supervises an apprentice is called a journeyman. I call them a journeywoman. My sincere desire and wish would be that the association assists in the mentoring, coaching, and being journeymen and journeywomen to the current cohort of directors general and senior management in the public service. Your experience and skills would come in handy here. I noticed that this is a role that you naturally see for yourselves. I do want to assure you that there would be reception to such a role on the other side. In the Association of Former Directors General, I find a formidable ally. Rest assured that I will approach you from time to time on matters of great importance to the country. The president already runs a number of advisory councils. If you agree, I wouldn't mind to constitute you an advisory council in the same spirit and in the same vein, so I can count on you and be sure that I am optimally and best advised at all times. Chairperson, the association can count on my support. I wish you all of the very best and success in your endeavors. And in fact, I look forward to a lot of engagements with yourselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, DG. And I mean, those have been quite encouraging words. And I'm sure as we reflect as the association, we would be able, I'm sure we'll be able to rise to the challenge and heed to the call that you've made. We are, okay, in terms of the program, we are slightly behind, but we're still okay because we're now in the on Q&A session. I'm just going to remove spotlight. So the floor is open for people to make comments and other comments have been made in the chat box. There was a comment in the beginning about part-time commissioners or commissioners, should they be full-time? There was a suggestion that maybe that could be explored. A couple of people spoke about how they congratulated all of us for this moment, and a real challenge thrown by the DG and Jenny women and men, an advisory team. Masupula says, wow. And all the best, DG Pindi, and you've got people that are in full support of what you're doing. And I see now former DG Jezile, who's now Ambassador Jezile, says interesting reflection on expectations for Association of DG, very much pointed. Any other comments? I'm gonna cut that shorter because of time. We would like to honor the time that we contracted on, which was 5 p.m. and like to finish at that time. But we still have administrative issues because this is a launch and part 3 of the agenda involves those administrative issues. But I will allow 1 or 2 comments, very brief, if any. The floor is open. Please make sure that you unmute yourself and you switch on your camera when you want to say something. And you can raise your hand. I don't see any hands, and I would check if there's any hands that I'm missing. Reverend Chikane. You muted, sir.
if there's no any hand, I thought I must fill the vacuum. I can't not fill it. Firstly, I just want to thank the chair of the Public Service Commission and the DG in the presidency. I didn't say so, DG Pindi Lebaleni. I put on the presidency's t-shirt deliberately on Imbizo and declared this place an Imbizo for us for discussion. But I just want to say thank you very much. I think we appreciate the positive responses to what we are doing. I would like to say to the chair of the commission about former DGs, I think that generation of DGs are unlikely to look for an advert and apply. I don't think they would. I would imagine if they are needed, they really need to be approached to make themselves available for any service that is required. But it would be unusual to look for an advert and then apply but at least that generation I know. I don't know today. So I think we should find a way in which now that we have an association, we can help each other to say what types of skill mix is required and which people would do better in those places than others, because not all of us are cut for the same responsibilities. I thought I must mention that we can have further discussions outside this forum. Yeah.
Thanks, Reverend. I've got two hands and a question on the chat. The one question is, what does this forum see the role of academics to be? So that's the one question, if colleagues can prepare themselves to answer that. And then two hands, Portia, Dabi, and Bumi. Portia, you're next.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you very much. And thank you for the invite. I thought, so Deepak, I did listen and replied. I really have enjoyed the conversation. In some ways, I'm one who has to engage with the government more directly from an SOE space. I don't know what Mpumi is going to say, but mine is to say, I mean, I don't know, you on one side, because some of us who are on the other side can't double hat, run up and down. Whatever help we can, I think, at least I can talk for myself, we can provide, we would provide. But we definitely, urgently need real support that goes back and shores up the capacity in the public sector. Now, we were never always the most open government, and we still are not, in terms of receiving support, and especially if it's seen as a critique of capacity that people have. But frankly, as a country, we can't afford the ego. There is just too much. You know, a small issue, which especially when Bongi was talking, I was just thinking about this. I recently had a situation where the conversation arose around the Exchequer Act. Now, those of us who were in government from those days, when there was a movement from tender boards, from the Exchequer Act towards the PFMA, with all of the PFMA's issues, right, it was a significant shift from that to what we have today. You've seen a reversal back towards things like the Exchequer Act, which behavior, tender boards and the rest of life, which create the original inefficiency that we were fixing. So I really do think, I mean, even in as far as this collective acting as a cohort of advisors which give notes on this is where we were coming from, this is the problem that we were solving, this is why we did whatever it is, and then stand back and then let whoever is in the leadership at the stage make their decisions on how they go forward. Because what we're finding is that the gap in the history of why particular decisions were made is actually quite a serious deterrent to having significant progress. But I really applaud you in any shape or form that we can help I personally will provide whatever help is possible. Thanks, Pam.
Thank you very much, Mpumi. And then Professor Saban is the last one. And then we're gonna have to cut the questions and the comments.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank
I'll
you
be
very
very
much,
quick.
colleagues.
Congratulations on this very significant launch. In building a capable and developmental state, there's a resurgence of the value perspective in keeping thereof. And there's three perspectives I want to quickly put on the table. One is the organizational values and laws. Two is the citizenship and stewardship with ethical obligations. And three is the public interest of society at large. So then my question in ventilating our ideas and suggestions this afternoon is I'd like to hear the views of any of the panel members, particularly the DGs, on the aspect of political responsiveness, given the political administrative dichotomy in the quality of public administration of the future in our public service practices. Thank you.
Thank you, Mpumi. You're the last one. And if colleagues can just
thank you
answer
very
the questions
much.
in the chat box. Sorry about that.
Thank you very much. Yeah. No, thank you very much, Program Director, and thank you to the former DGs who have spoken. I acknowledge the presence of the Auditor General, Chairperson of the PSC and the commissioners present, and all the DGs that are present, and the DG in the presidency who's spoken very well and given us direction. Mine is to really just reflect on the genesis of this, and I thought I would like to make an addition to what Bongi outlined as to the actual foundations and the conceptualization of this particular body. And I thought it was important just to recall, because at the beginning of this concept, we had taken various consultations and influence the formation of this association, and I just would like us to acknowledge them, is in the door-to-door of the consultation of asking the question, what was to be done? It really was the Association of Former Ambassadors, High Commissioners, and Chief Representatives, which was launched on the 16th of July, 2015, which actually had inspired us in the establishment of this association. And we shared notes with them, and particularly their reflections on how they had established that association, and with the clear objective of establishing a network for former heads of missions and collaborating around how, as the Brain Trust supporting DECO, they would be able to provide assistance to government. Now, the question that arises in my mind is whether or not we would want to continue, and I think it would be advisable, to continue with the collaboration with other associations, such as that association. I'm not sure of its status today, but importantly, our conceptualization was really inspired by that had been done in 2015 by the former ambassadors and chief representatives and high commissioners. The question as well around how we broaden the impact of this association would then lie in the collaboration between the former DGs, the former ambassadors, and I would like to add, Portia has spoken about some of the challenges we face as SOEs, and just needing to be able to link back into the Brains Trust and be able to inform our positions and influence them in a way that is rooted in the values and the culture that we developed in the public sector. And again, look at the former SOE leadership, and that in a way to the DG of the presidency, it would really be the collaboration between all of these various associations, which really constitute the people who participated from 1994, the Brains Trust, and those that have participated in the democratization project. And that, I think, would actually enhance our impact, but also ensure better collaboration with other like-minded institutions in order to gain traction and also bring back to active participation of all of those sectors. And that's my humble contribution about the future focus area for the association that would actually enable and give us traction to actually collaborate in the future in many directions. I want to acknowledge particularly the late former ambassador, George Nene, Ambassador Welile Nhlapo and the former Deputy Minister of DIRCO, Aziz Fahad, with whom the original conceptualization was really undertaken in order for us at the time of drafting the memo in 2016 to agree to the idea of an association, because the former ambassadors, high commissioners, and chief representatives had successfully launched theirs in the year preceding. Thank you very much, Program Director.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm going to hand over to Vusi, who's going to be managing the adoption of the launch resolution. It was circulated to former DGs, or members of the association rather. And I think, we're going to be running a poll in terms of accepting or not accepting it, but let me hand over to Vusi.
Thank you, Program Director, and good morning, everybody. Time is the enemy. Fortunately, we've got the benefit of having seen the draft resolution, which will become a formal resolution after its adoption. So I don't expect us to spend more time on it. But as Pam has indicated, we need to have a poll just to indicate the number of members of the association who are supportive of the resolution. Perhaps to save time, let me just talk to the nub of this draft resolution. Basically, it seeks to authorize the Interim Management Committee to do three things. One is to establish the association as a legal entity. That's what we are authorizing the Interim Management Committee to do. Secondly, one of their tasks will be to consider and approve or not approve applications for membership of the association. And thirdly, we are authorizing the Interim Management Committee to convene the inaugural meeting of the association within 2 months of today's date. That sits at the center of the resolution. So this is what we are called upon to do. The other things, it's your normal preamble, which we have talked about for so long. It does not change anything. I need not read it as it is because we have had the benefit of seeing it. We're not seeing it for the first time. And perhaps in the poll itself, that will indicate how much support this draft resolution has before its adoption. The poll will be limited to the members of the association. Perhaps let's just have a few minutes to reflect on the content of this draft resolution and perhaps indicate as to whether there's agreement or if there's anybody who wishes to raise an issue, whether it be in the preamble or in the identified purposes that we have, which are simple. The first one specifically is to contribute to the professionalization of the public service. Secondly, to support the broader public sector reform. And thirdly, to assist in the building of a capable state for all South Africans. That's what sits at the nub of this, at the center of this resolution. Can we have any indication of anybody wishing to say one thing or two about this resolution? Because basically this is what will determine the success of this launch, is the adoption of this resolution. It's very important for us to be clear about what we are authorizing the Interim Management Committee to do as members of the association.
Colleague Vusi, if I may come in, it's Deepak.
Yes.
In discussions amongst some of us, we noticed that in the Interim Management Committee, there was an absence of a former Director General from a sphere of government other than national. And therefore, we wanted to propose, although he hasn't accepted the nomination, we'll persuade him, Zwelibanzi Mtambo to be joined or to be added to the Interim Management Committee, please.
Thanks, Deepak. I think it makes eminent sense to make sure that at least the two spheres of government, that is the national and provincial, are appropriately represented in this association. Is there any indication of anybody objecting to the proposal as made by Deepak? I see that
we agree. We agree.
Is supportive.
Yeah.
And also
Agreed.
body. Okay, that's carried. I think we're all agreed then that we shall have Zweli as part of the Interim Management Committee. That's it. I don't see any objection to the adoption of this resolution, in which case, may we applaud ourselves for having successfully adopted this resolution. And then, of course, there is a form that will indicate how we view this. Do you, as a former DG, support the adoption of the launch resolution? And we have to indicate, as I've indicated, I've been saying yes, and I'm submitting it. I hope all of us will do likewise in indicating our support of the launch resolution. Pam, may I go back to you to do the rest of the agenda items? Thank you very much, colleagues.
Thank you very much, Vusi. I see the poll, if we could just leave it for another minute or two to continue, and just note the message from the Auditor General, who says, congratulations on this launch and best wishes for the road ahead. Please excuse me. Thank you very much, Madam, for honoring our launch. And I'm going to hand over to Deepak, who literally has 1 minute, because we are on the hour, to say a vote of thanks. And from my side, I want to say thank you very much. I'm not going to speak again because we are on time. We're at the end of our time that we contracted on. Deepak?
Thank you, Madam Program Director. Mine is very short and sweet. To say, firstly, that this has been quite a journey, and it has been expounded upon by many people. What started out as a disgruntled group of people very concerned, I think, have now navigated a path to becoming constructively engaged with progressive contributions in mind to the process of reforming as well as building the capability of the state. Special thank you to Pindi Mabena, Director General in the Presidency. Your challenge to us and your welcome in formation of this association is very, very much appreciated. Special thanks to the Chair of the Public Service Commission, Advocate, your words of wisdom as well as your challenges have also been taken on board. Finally, a special thanks to the Coordinating Committee of the former DGs, without whom this process would not have come to fruition. And lastly, but not least, all of you who former DGs have attended today and have put your names and signature to the formation and launch of this association. Thank you very, very much. Goodbye.
Thanks.
Thank you.
2 minutes. We're done. Goodbye.
We're done. Thank you, everybody.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
I thank you.
Hey, more work.
Yes. Yeah.
Well done, well done, well done, well done.
Well done, everyone. That was a great event.
And 100%
well done.
Yeah, 100%.
That's great. Now we'll have to roll up our sleeves.
So now we need to.
Well done, everybody. Bye.
Hey,
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers, colleagues. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Great work.